Welcome. I'm on my travels again. I'm walking out of Battle in Sussex towards a little village called Westfield, which I've mentioned before. Some of my ancestors came from Westfield. I didn't actually know about this until I started researching my ancestral tree. So all this sort of area is definitely my ancestral ground. It's a lovely sunny day, apart from a couple of people walking the other way on this track. It's pretty quiet, so you probably can hear the birds singing, the buzz of a chainsaw. There's quite a lot of butterflies as well at the moment, which is nice. I'm sort of reflecting on a couple of interviews I've just done. One of them was with Bob Morrell. I'm just going to pause a minute. And we were discussing this thorny subject of what to charge, and this is quite an issue, particularly amongst people who charge for their time. So for us, it's people like guitar teachers, well, music teachers, guitar teachers, music teachers, but it could also be, what you charge as a band going out, or anything really. So in certain businesses, of course, you could just look at the going rate and just sort of peg your prices to that. But going back to the sort of thing of teaching, lots of kids coming out of music college, and they're charging sort of stupidly low prices because they think that's all that people will pay. Because what Bob demonstrates rather eloquently in the podcast is that you set your price, not the customer. So if you're not charging enough, that's down to you. It's not them. You've already painted yourself into a corner. So it really started making me reflect on, as artists, what we do to limit not just our pricing, but what we can do, what we believe that we can do, musically, how we can find it very difficult working with other people because we lose control of our artistic control and all the rest of it. And these are massive issues for musicians and artists generally. So there's a train going by. So Bob's discussion with me is about the fact that we lose sight of the things that engage customers, clients, or whatever you want to call them, pupils, with something that enables us to charge a fee. I'm just about to walk through, or underneath a railway line, through a tunnel. So it'd be an interesting sound here. Part of the sound effects. So the point is that when money is involved, there is an emotion. So people parting with money requires some sort of emotional connection. In other words, you want that thing, or you have to have that thing. This is why lawyers and medical profession can charge such high amounts of money, because often there's a desperation for the service that they offer to relieve a problem that you have. So it's like saying, the hypothetical cancer treatment that is 100% successful, guaranteed, you could charge what you want for that, because it just hits all of those sort of key points. Now, let's sort of scale that back to us as musicians and artists. You've got to find that point of sale or that point of interest from a prospective client. They've just spent a lot of money on a guitar and they can't play it. So what you've got to focus on is the amount of money they spent on the instrument, and that there is a desire to learn to play and realise how wonderful the instrument is. Or you're playing for a wedding, and of course people want the perfect band for their reception. Now, we always think as artists we sort of undervalue ourselves. I think that's pretty typical. And I learned a couple of lessons very early on from people who said that they couldn't pay more than a certain amount of money for lessons, and I just charged under the going rate for what I was doing. And then it got to a point where they were having lessons at school, and then it was going to become too expensive for them to have lessons and all the rest of it. But in the conversation, I discovered that this particular child was going to Disneyland. And it was like, well, there's money for that, but there's not money to learn a musical instrument, which angered me basically. But of course you can see that it's just about what they term as priorities. So you have to understand that that's how it works. So people say they haven't got the money, but they have. If people genuinely haven't got the money, they wouldn't be going anywhere, let alone Disneyland. So we've really got to get our heads around what goes on with people and their reasoning. Not that they're wrong, it's just the way the world is, but it shouldn't affect us. Now, if we can make sense of that, I'm going to have somebody. Okay, sorry, had to deal with a dog. So back to the thing about sort of pain points and stuff. You can see where sometimes we will have to adapt if we're talking about earning money. What skills that we have that involve music, if that's what we're doing. That would mean that we could make a living from that. So just playing the music that we want to write may not be enough. We might have to find a reason, adding a value to what we do. Obviously musicians find this tricky. They feel like they're selling out. But the trouble is, if you're looking to make money from what you do, it's not the art form itself that's the problem. It's the way that the art form is being expressed so it can be monetized. And again, back in this conversation we had with Bob, if you want to stick true to your art, that might mean that you can't make money from it, because it's an art form. Okay, so you can't necessarily expect people to give you money just because you're doing something, obviously. But if that thing that you're doing has some sort of value to somebody, then they'll pay you. That's the way it works. So it's a case of you finding the value in what it is that you do. So, as an example to this, if you look at really successful bands, whether that's Led Zeppelin or Guns N' Roses or Oasis, when you buy, well, certainly back in the day, if you bought an album by these people, you were investing, you were making a statement of who you were. You were buying into a club. Were you with the Beatles or were you with the Stones? Were you with Blur or were you with Oasis? Were you somebody into rock music, were you into heavy rock, or were you into metal, and so on? That's why these labels work, because it quantifies an identity. Now, that also points to the fact that the people who make money out of a genre aren't the people who originate it. We don't know who they are, whether that's reggae or whether it's rock and roll, whether it's funk. We don't know who these original people were. But somewhere along the line, there's enough adherence and interest in a particular style for you to get your Bob Marleys and your Sly and the Family Stone and your Beatles and Led Zeppelin. So those people who take a style and tweak it and make something supposedly in inverted, marks, new, like the Led Zeppelins, they're basically taking rock or blues and tweaking it to create something. It's a little bit like you've got the phone and now you make the mobile phone. That is probably the way to make the money, not to try and invent a new style of music that nobody's ever heard, because again, you won't be known. Okay, not of course if that style of music could cure cancer, then you'd make money. But that's not to do with the style of music, that's to do with the causative effects of what that could do. So my sort of passion for music and teaching, and trying to reinvigorate the power of music in the world, it's more a case of us reconnecting with the real power of the arts, because we've commoditised it want to make money out of it. But the real power of the arts is in its transformative aspect. So, I'm not the only one doing this. Lots of people doing this, but the point is that all these characters are sort of floating along, mostly under the surface. You get the occasional characters who wear their heart on their sleeves and make statements that people sort of find curious, like Alan Moore's thing about becoming a magician. But that's also true with people like Grant Morrison and his books that are his sort of graphic novels, which are, well, he calls them hypersigils, that they change reality by their existence. Now, from anybody coming from a materialist perspective, that seems absurd and ridiculous. But of course, if you come from the point that words change things, because they obviously do, and the written word changes things. So this brings me to a point about a book which, in fact, there are a series of books actually by Cialdini. One of them is, I think it's called Influence, but it's basically the idea of how marketers can use how we're wired up to sell us something. And I think this one's called Tools of Influence, but it used to be called Weapons of Influence or something. But he comes up with this thing of click-whir, which is like how you're wired up. So for instance, he quotes, he cites the thing about a turkey that recognises its young by their cheeping. So if you had the sort of predator, some sort of mongoose type sort of dummy that has the sound of a turkey cheeping, it will take that as being one of its offspring. But as soon as that's turned off, it will attack this little sort of poppet type thing. And we look at that and think, oh, isn't that cute? That's the type of thing that animals do, but we do it. We do this. We're wired up to make very quick decisions about things, and it's those quick decisions that can get us not into trouble. Well, yeah, they can get us into trouble, basically. So we don't necessarily want to find out the information ourselves. We'll just listen to somebody who's a supposed expert, and that takes us off on a little journey that can, before we know it, it's like you've lost all your control in the world. I don't need to quote anything. I'm sure you all know lots of examples in your own life where you started thinking, in the words of talking heads, this is not my wife, this is not my house, how did I get here? And it's that idea of not really thinking things through, or you taking agency in the world. So let's take this back to the initial point about how we view pricing, who we are, what we have to offer, what it is that people want. And a lot of that reasoning about what we can charge and all the rest of it comes from somewhere else, people that we deem as experts instead of us creating a context and a scenario where we could charge more. So for all the people that are charging the low rate, that's saying, people won't pay any more than this, in the same area there will be somebody charging double that or even triple that quite comfortably. And so what's the answer? Why is that the case? And if you ask those people, they'd be like, well, the type of people that come to me wouldn't pay that. So then you have to think, well, why are you attracting those people? What is it that you're doing? What's the value? What is it these other people are doing? They're attracting a different type of person. So there's a couple of points here. So I'll just talk about, well, let's cite a couple of things that just popped into my head actually. Tribute bands. Now, this is one of the things that, they're very successful generally. And if you can, you can emulate a particular band that would have a following, whether that's the Queen act or the Rolling Stones or the Beatles or Sting or you name it, then there's a market for that. Because obviously if somebody really likes the Rolling Stones, they're not going to be able to pay for the Rolling Stones to turn up at their wedding, are they? But they could pay for you. So some of the previous podcasts I interviewed Toby Boyle, who is Bjorn of Bjorn Again, and these bands play all over the place, all over the world. It's like they're not just down the local pub, right? They're doing incredible gigs. So if you really hone that act, that's something that you could do. Okay, it might not be the thing you want to do, I know, but this is about money. It's about earning a living. So going back to now, teaching and stuff like that. What is it that you're offering? I offer sort of an immersive teaching thing, style. So it's not just about playing the guitar or singing. It includes songwriting, playing in a band, performance techniques, and being able to, look at what music can do, how it can impact your life. It can change the world that you live in. And that's not, necessarily, becoming a rock star and doing the tour, although in some cases it can be that. But it's also about what does that do to you to change the way you see the world, and how, wonderful things can happen because you're thinking differently, thinking creatively about life. And that's really well explored with music. So, it's interesting in the years that you spend doing a particular thing, like learning an instrument, for instance, and you realise, of course, you never stop learning. If you think you got to the point where you know it all, you're obviously deluded at that point, because it's impossible to know it all. In martial arts, they've got this idea of the beginner's mind. There comes a point where to progress, you have to realise that you know nothing, and you've gone back again to the beginning. But I've also found this to do with human behaviour, where you know, I've observed people over years with that sort of viewpoint of observing up close how people learn. And okay, I don't necessarily know the ins and outs of their life, but I've got a pretty good idea what goes on in their head. But I can be completely wrong. And I've had a couple of extraordinary lessons where I've assumed that somebody understands or can be very logical about something, and they can't be. And that's been quite maybe a shock, but that having that sort of revisionist attitude that you need to it's one of those moments where it changes the world, and then you realise that's been going on all the time. Of course, it's only me that didn't spot it, and you know, those things can be difficult and painful, but of course that's the nature of learning, isn't it? So again, you know, this is one of the things that we get with learning a musical instrument. It's painful at times. It's always you struggling to make a change. And of course, whenever you do something that conflicts with your programming, it feels wrong, it feels hard, makes you feel worthless and all those type of things. But, you know, going back to that sort of martial arts, sort of Zen or Taoist attitude of it being about flow, it being about not even the ideas that you have are real, you know, everything sort of dissolving into this sort of flow of what happens with nature, how things ebb and flow and grow and die and are transformed. You know, music and the arts is an excellent example of that. How it's transformative, and how you see how you can change and what effect it has on the world. And some days you can play well and other days you can't, and so on. And seeing that sort of close at hand with people who you realise they have no ability to rationalise the world, but on the surface it looks like they are. And then you realise that maybe you're doing it, you know, I'm doing it myself, where I think I'm making rational decisions about things, but they're not. It's all part of how this works. And again, it sort of touches on how music can explore that sort of slightly mythic world, the world of the unconscious that doesn't sort of make sense. So going back to that first point, what you believe is possible, or the limitations of what you can charge or what you can do, is an illusion. And you can build a better illusion by imagining a better outcome. So one final point. There was a bit of research done I don't know where I heard this. I think this one was from a professor called Margaret Neal. I think she was at Harvard. I can't quite remember. But she was talking about negotiation. And she was saying that often what happens with people when they go to negotiate is they have in mind the worst case scenario or the accepted scenario. And what she says is that limits the negotiation. What you actually need is an imaginative potential outcome. She said, now the only problem with this is that you won't necessarily achieve that. And by the fact that you don't achieve that, it doesn't feel as good as you achieving the thing that you know, like a worst case scenario type of thing, or the thing that you're sort of happy with type of idea. But she said, in research, what happens is that you get a better outcome if you go for the thing that's more imaginative, even if you don't achieve fully what it is that's potential. So she said it depends whether you want to be happy or you want to get a better outcome. So I'll sort of leave that with you to ponder. And yeah, think about what you're charging in all aspects. Think about how you're living your life and get better aspirations. Until next time, all the best.